I have particular commendation for the manner in which they have brought this act together. So the first high point was that it made it gender neutral. Secondly, if you see the definitions of the sexual assault, now we have to bear in mind that this is a legislation that's come in 2012, prior to the Nirbhaya movement, culminating into the amendment to the criminal law, which are now called Nirbhaya amendments of 2013, the criminal law amendments, which expanded the definition of rape. Otherwise, what one would see was that for rape offenses, uh, the kind of arguments that used to happen were, with regard to whether penetration has happened, not happened. So it actually used to amount to adding insult to injury when these cases were being examined in the court of law. So the definition here has taken it to different degrees. There is it takes it in different brackets, actually, the brackets being penetrative sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, or just sexual assault. And the definition is, depending on how severe the offenses are, the sentences are prescribed in that manner, that when the offenses are smaller offenses, the sentence that is prescribed is smaller. For repeat offenders, the punishment that is prescribed is much higher. Then the third very important aspect that this act added was, this set up a completely different mechanism. So this took the victims out of the criminal justice delivery system that existed in the form of regular courts. Now, if any one of you would have had the occasion to go have a look at POCSO courts, you would see that, or a regular court. If you have seen a regular court, you will see that regular courts um, are places which are very intimidating. They're very intimidating, the kind of activities that go on there, the kind of people that are coming in, going out. Obviously the prisoners under trials are brought in to attend to their cases, etc. So the whole atmosphere, there are cops, and many of these, though handcuffing is not really permissible, but in some circumstances the handcuffing has to be done, or the cops are holding some people, and all so that is the whole atmosphere. So you bring a child who has been a victim of sexual assault in that kind of an atmosphere. It is like you are forcing him into a situation where he can't really even aspire to get justice. I mean, think he will be so intimidated. So POCSO courts were segregated from the regular courts. The whole idea was to have special, separate, segregated POCSO courts. But till the time, of course, India is a country where resource crunch is a huge crunch, which is there in all kinds of resources, whether they are economic resources, whether they are education resources, whether they are hospital healthcare resources. Same is the case with judicial resources. Our we forever seems to be playing catch up, and by the time we catch up, the population explodes even further. So our resources continue to be a problem, and the Supreme Court has also monitored the functioning of this act. And what they have done is, till the time new courts are framed, one district judge in each district is nominated as a special POCSO judge. So that court is made separate, the atmosphere is different, and the manner in which the testimony of the victim is recorded. Victim is not made to to have a confrontation with the accused, whereas for all other testimonies, evidence is recorded, and then the accused and his counsel get an opportunity to cross examine. That is how the evidence is weighed in a trial. But that also can be very, very intimidating to bring the victim of sexual assault, who is a child and obviously more vulnerable position. If you bring that child face to face with the accused or the perpetrator of the assault, then it can the whole thing can be completely counterproductive. These may appear to be small changes, but in practice these are really, really significant changes, which have really turned the turned around how sexual offenses for children below 18 years are treated. There are also some special provisions with regard to if the child victim is unable to express himself, maybe because of being too immature, or any other physical or emotional mental disability that he may be suffering from. Then there is a provision, so at all stages, if the victims are such, then the punishment is higher. Then another aspect of it is there is a vulnerable witness program, where it is allowed for you to bring in experts, aid to give evidence, etc. So, well, I think that I will end with my introductory remarks on this, and let's see if you have any questions. So completely, I mean, I just wanted to give you that perspective that before Nirbhaya amendments came a legislation that was so forward looking, and that took care of the detail. There is attention to detail is significant in this act. It also prescribes time bound trials. Um, some things get stuck in the loopholes, but the whole framework and intention of the act is very, very nice.
Thank you so much for those remarks, ma'am. I would let everything that you just said sink in into our members while they can process and start asking you questions. But there's a little thing that I wanted to ask you personally. I was waiting for this opportunity. And that is, ma'am, I've got cousins who are studying law currently. And having said that, I studied this law around 3 years ago, and I've been on to it for a while now. So I always have this curiosity to ask them about, how is it taught in classes while they're studying law? Because I'm sure they do study various acts, and it is often said that uh, every law which is related to sexual offenses, even like for women, like the rape laws and even the POSCO Act, it's normally ignored in the classes. They just said that, yeah, this is something you're supposed to self read on. But so do you feel that even after a legislation so strong, one of the major reasons why the implementation of this law is lacking in our country is because it is still not getting the due importance that it is supposed to receive?
So, Ayusha, teaching students of law with focus would be one aspect. I really can't comment on that. I have not, I don't have too much idea of how it is included in the curriculum. But I must certainly tell you that this act itself prescribes and provides for awareness campaigns to be conducted by the state. And, the manner in which it prescribes the procedure for reporting of offenses, it puts the onus on the police. If the police does not take action, then then it is actionable. And this also was putting the onus really on the law enforcement agency. There is provision for how the media is supposed to obligated to act in such kind of offenses. There is, of course, also a provision for if false complaints are made, because if you have such a stringent law, you have to have a provision for how false complaints will be dealt with. But essentially, the requirement of awareness is ingrained in the act itself. It mandates that guidelines will be framed by the governments. It mandates that legal aid committees are available. It mandates that legal practitioners are available for guidance, counseling, and legal assistance that may be required by the child, victim, her family, his family. There is provision of medical assistance, emotional assistance, financial assistance. All that is ingrained in the act itself. So I don't think Section 43 is the particular section that requires the central government and every state government to take measures to ensure that this act is given wide publicity. And I remember this because the courts were asking, where else have you given this, publicity to this? And so time to time, you see that awareness campaigns are being held through advertisements, radios, televisions, public media. Um, So that mandate, I think, takes care of it. But of course, law students, you are a very curious generation. You will get to whatever you need to get to. That has been my experience with your generation, and your generation really gives me hope.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Another question, ma'am, is that while conducting these sessions, even for us, our entire campaign is based on talking about the act, talking about the good touch and the bad touch. In my personal experience, when talking to children about the helplines, or when we mention the abuse and what it is, children often confide to us. They often tell us, okay, this is happening in my house. I've told my parents, they're not listening to me. A lot of times it is the parents who are doing that. What is the provision in the law, within the law, when it is the own family members who are abusing the child? For, say, a father who is the sole bread earner in the family, if he is the person abusing the child, then what does the law provide for the child in the family in such a case?
So, Aisha, you did raise this is a very serious issue actually that is gripping us. In fact, at least half, if not more than that, at least half of the cases of all cases of sexual assaults across all ages, and and a majority of them being vulnerable groups. Because when a person feels that they are in a position, a position of power, authority, confidence with the child, and abuse of that is a very, very serious and a rampant problem that is faced specifically in sexual offenses. And from the whole variety, whether it is apparently innocuous kind of offenses or the more heinous offenses of aggravated sexual assault or penetrative sexual assault, rape, that how it is defined in the IPC, and both in the POXO Act. But I must also make this comparison with the IPC, because IPC also prescribes a higher punishment for women who are assaulted by, in places where people are in a position of authority or confidence or position of power with those women. So if this happens in the police stations or women's home, etc., then the law prescribes a much more strenuous punishment. Similar is the case here, and it adds another dimension, because here you have to add the dimension of who takes care of the child. I mean, punishment and complaint and all that is all very fine, but uh, when the protector of the child is turning predator, so you have to not just provide succor to the child in the form of the setting the justice delivery mechanism in motion, but also to provide a safe, secure place for the child, where his welfare of the child can be taken care of. So the mechanism of the act actually prescribes for all that. There are accredited NGOs who have to seek accreditation from the Women and Child Ministry. They are given an important responsibility. Then there are child welfare homes which are run under the statutory framework of the government. So the mechanism is that uh, funds are divided between center and state. The center gives a big portion of the funds. The states contribute some portion of the funds. It actually depends on what's the kind. If they're union territories, then there's a higher percentage. Northeast states, higher percentage, but it's a division of percentage between central government, state government, and the state governments run these child welfare homes. But there are compliance reports which are sent every month, and a proper mechanism is in place, and NGOs are also involved in that, but accredited NGOs who are involved to ensure that the child, his welfare, his development can go on unhindered, uh, and irrespective of the offense that he has faced.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I see a couple of questions in the chat. Vidhi, would you like to ask your question to ma'am directly?
Hello, ma'am. So, ma'am, you just said that under this act we provide emotional assistance to the victim as the medical assistant or the financial assistance. So, I just wanted to know what kind of emotional assistance an act or the legislature can provide the victim.
So the manner in which it is provided with is that every child will not need the same kind of things, but experts are available to see that what is the the emotional. There are one-stop centers that are available for these victims of assault, to see if they need any physical, not really physical, but if they need any medical attention, if they because rape is something that bruises the soul. It is not just a, it's not just a physical act. And when a sexual assault is happening on children of vulnerable ages, that assault on the soul, on the mind, on the conscience is very, very intense. And actually, more often than not, children have to be counseled, brought back to the mainstream, so that this does not become and one aspect of that. So there are experts. So the provision in the act is for inclusion of experts whenever it is required. The provisions are for setting up of these one-stop centers. The provision is for monetary compensation. Whatever is the cost of the medical or psychiatric assistance that is required is all borne by the states. There is also now provision for providing otherwise monetary compensation to the victim and the family, so that they can tide over the difficult times and move on. So it's not specifically that what kind each one would be provided. That would depend on what the experts feel would be relevant for each person. But essentially, because these crimes bruise the soul, I said, so it is necessary to integrate that. Earlier, it used to be thought that well, there's no physical injury, so nothing has happened, it's okay, let it be. You have to appreciate that when rape was initially, it was initially not considered as an offense against the woman, because woman did not have, under the Anglo-Saxon law, the woman did not have right of self-determination. It used to be till the 18th century, it was considered as a crime against the property of the father if the girl was unmarried, or property of the husband if the girl was married, because that is how it was understood. The IPC also, IPC prescribes a separate age if the man has sexual intercourse with his own wife. We are, of course, now having a whole debate about the marital rape, and I'm sure that's another topic, another day for that. But things are changing. We 2 years back we had a judgment from Supreme Court independent thought, where they said no. Marriage means, you can't have a separate age. A child is a child, whether the child is married or unmarried. 18 years, below 18 years is a child, so she has to be treated at par.
Thank you, Vidhi. Nidhi, the next question is from you. Would you like to ask it to ma'am yourself?
Yes, Ayusha, thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am. It's been lovely to listen to you and to interact with an esteemed legal professional such as yourself. So my question is, you say you in one of your responses to Ayusha's questions, you mentioned that in the act in the POXO Act, the role of law enforcement agencies and the police is very instrumental. So if so, like to what extent does the attitude and proactive approach of these agencies play a role in in successfully implementing this act? Because if the police is not sensitive to how to the nature of these cases and how vulnerable these victims are, if if the sensitivity of the police has not increased, how can this act be successfully implemented?
That is the biggest roadblock to my mind, Nidhi. And that is the biggest roadblock, not just for this law, but for most laws in India. Actually, police are the point of first contact, no matter what you may prescribe in the law. And let me tell you, with my about 2.5 decades of experience of practicing law, and as a student of law, I feel that India has amongst the most robust laws in all jurisdictions and all areas. but our biggest problem is enforcement. And that enforcement problem starts from the point of first contact, which is the police machinery, and carries on during the stage of the investigation. uh, Investigative agencies are they are still not using the scientific tools and technology that they ought to be using. Police has no sensitivity. I have had clients who came to me and told me that हम सुबह से बैठे हुए थे एफआईआर लिखाने के लिए अपनी बच्ची का, तो हमें तो 10 बार ये सवाल पूछा कि लड़के के साथ भाग गई होगी, उसका बॉयफ्रेंड होगा, दोस्त कौन है, क्या है. And one affluent family comes with a report of a missing dog, and that is reported immediately. I have had clients who came and narrated this incident from police stations to me. So that is the reality that we deal with, unfortunately. And it is unfortunate because that is not something that the law can fill up. That is not a lacuna that the best robust laws can fill up. That will change only with these kind of provisions, that the onus shifts on them, but also by us being zero tolerant about it. We have to have zero tolerance for and zero patience for all offenses of sexual assaults, etc., in public spaces. It is just not done. How can you allow this to just continue to go on unabated in this manner? And let me tell you, things don't improve from there. As the case moves into the court of law, it is the Supreme Court has itself said it amounts to adding insult to injury whenever a victim is brought into the justice delivery mechanism. It's like rubbing salt over somebody's wounds. The systems take so long. The justice delivery mechanism is so slow. They are clogged with cases so much that there's no priority, and justice delayed is justice denied. We have heard that enough number of times, but we have not been able to do anything about it for the last 50-60 years. Palkiwala said in one of his lectures, the famous doyen of the legal world, somebody who stood up for liberties like anything, he said, well, when it's the whole concept of justice delivery was that you're going to the temple of justice. There is a lady justice who's supposed to be a goddess, and you are going to, so the courts have always been equated to cathedrals. But and Palkiwala said this 40 years back, but he said it is unfortunate that today courts have become, people come there to gamble, whether I can take a gamble with this case, not really to seek recourse to their we see that happening 40 years hence. Nothing has changed. It has been pretty much the same. And we can't put all blame on the police also. The Prakash Singh judgment, if you would have followed, the Supreme Court has asked the government 20 years back, you should have a separate mechanism for law enforcement, separate mechanism for investigation. You can't have the same beat constable who has no expertise or acumen to collect evidence, whose job is otherwise to give beat to the areas. I mean, as a gashti, be a beat constable to localities. If he is the one who has to collect evidence also and carry out investigation, then it's appalling state of affairs. Then the whole VIP culture that we have, the police duties are most of them with the VIP cultures, and there the sensitivity is so high that there nobody needs to be told that you can't slip up. But for offenses against women, and see, another aspect is this is just the mechanism which is reactive mechanism, because the offense has already happened. This whole mechanism comes after this. But we also have to speak about the proactive mechanism, a mechanism that is preemptive, actually is almost like addressing a thing before it happens so that it does not happen. So that mechanism has to begin from our homes. If we are not going to treat our sons and daughters in the manner that they need to be treated. If we're not going to respect our mothers, if our fathers don't respect our mothers, then we think it's fine for us to do it. We don't allow our daughters to pursue their dreams, and we allow the sons to pursue their dreams, or we don't, treat our colleagues with the same respect that they deserve just because of their gender. So it is important to look at these things also. Yes, this change is very slow. It is a change that will change only with a generation, but we have to have that change also, because a reactive change uh, cannot hold for too long. It can only sustain, it can firefight for some time, but a lasting and enduring change will only happen one step at a time.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We're taking the last two questions for the day because I know ma'am really scooched us into her busy schedule. We'll let Mansha go, followed by Yajur. Mansha, if you could quickly ask your question to ma'am, please.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So my question here is, recently Disha Act was passed in Andhra Pradesh, which reduces the time period for judgment to 21 days, and that's a very good thing, I believe. So do we have any provisions for children in that?
So that is a act specifically for Andhra. It is, you are right, it's a welcome act, though a lot of people said that it's impossible to do it, but we have to still try. You can't give it up just before saying that. But the POXO itself prescribes. I think there's a 3-month prescription in the POXO Act, and that can be extended. But the POXO Act has a timeline that needs to be followed. I think in experience it is followed more in aberration than in practice. But like I said, where we are a developing country, there's a lot that needs to be done.
I'm sorry, can I ask a follow-up question here?
Sure.
So like you said 3 months is the timeline here. Like if the case extends to after 3 months, or is there any provision to like punish it or something to be done?
No, Mansha, that's what I was telling you, that prescription is there, but it is followed in aberration rather than followed in a routine. And the powers in criminal cases, you can't really put it hard and fast also, because you have to give that latitude and discretion with the district judge who's trying that offense. But they have to record reasons. They have to record reasons as to why the time is being extended, and there is a monitoring mechanism also, though it's not really prescribed in the act, but there's a monitoring mechanism where High Court calls for reports of cases which are pending, because in every state, High Court is the state the court which has a superintending power over all the other district courts. So they call for reports, etc., on the pendency, and wherever the statute mandates a period in which it has to be completed, then reasons have to be recorded.
Okay,
Things
thank you.
have to change, Mansa. I know it is difficult,
Yeah.
but they have to change.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mansha. Yajur, you can ask your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So the question that I wanted to ask, I'll first state the reason that I wanted to ask that question. The middle school I was studying in, there's a recent case that happened in that school. There was this fourth grade girl who is seen going inside a girl's washroom in the CCTV footage, and after like a 30 minutes or so, she's seen coming out of the washroom crying, and people are saying that her bua, that girl's bua, was teaching in the same school. So she goes to her bua and she complains about it to her bua, and then bua goes to the principal. So basically, she was abused by a cleaner in the washroom, but the cleaner's footage was like deleted by the school itself to like not anything come to their image or reputation. So my question is, as the member of Project Rakshak Army, we might be going to schools. Like I might be going to my middle school and like giving a speech to like a school assembly, telling them about good touch, bad touch, and there might be people who might be standing in that assembly who might be the ones who are the potential accusers. I feel at that time to say something which can trigger the accuser's head to not do what they were about to do, or what they might have done in future. And you, as being an advocate, might have come across a lot of accusers, and you might have had an insight of their heads and what goes inside their head, why they commit such heinous acts, and why they do what they do. And I just wanted to ask, like, is there a scope of improvement in those people? Like, is there something that can be said or that can be taught to them so that they don't do something like this? Like, instead of just telling students what good touch or bad touch
Yes,
is, like,
you're right, Yajur. That is a very practical aspect. I also went for a lecture to DPS on this, DPS Noida, and they also raised this issue. And in fact, the mandate of POCSO court is such that uh, when the child is in position, in these institutions, it could be school, it could be a creche, it could be a hostel or whatever. In these institutions where the other person is supposed to be in a position of authority with the child, there the onus is even more, and it amounts to aiding and abetting the crime and destruction of evidence. These are penal offenses, and if people are if people think that they can get away with this is very, very unfortunate, because you are actually interfering with a criminal investigation. You are misleading a criminal investigation. You are trying to destroy the evidence. These are penal offenses for which the school can be, individual persons can be booked, they can be sent to jail, and the school establishment itself can lose its license for acting in such a manner. So you must highlight this, that for schools and educational institutions to act responsibly. See, we live in a society, we can't help crime to be to be committed. Like, that's what I said. I mean, the whole law enforcement mechanism is a reactive mechanism that comes into place after the crime has happened. The While the generational change takes time and for things to happen, but the important aspect is that the responsibility that each stakeholder in the society understands and takes on his own shoulder. And if the school, you must wherever you can go, you must try and put it to them that as a school, as an educational institution, you may not be able to stop a crime, but to have correct reporting of crime, to have correct investigation of crime, to make sure that the perpetrators are accounted for. Now there is the mechanism of a directory also. Sexual offenders directory is also now in place. So all this is very, very important to be highlighted to the court, to these institutions when you go, and alarm them a little, that you don't think that because this is your school and your whip runs here with the students, you can destroy evidence. No, that is there, the penal law applies on you. So yes, that's a very relevant question you asked, Yajur, and if you have occasion to go to schools, please highlight those aspects.
and sorry, I actually even wanted to ask, like, what can be like said, maybe that can change the perspective of the potential accuser, maybe, like, something that you might add on to,
Like I
because you,
mentioned, highlight to them that if you interfere in any way, then you would be interfering with the criminal investigation. If you try to delete the CCTV footage, or
no, I actually meant to ask, like, what can be said to a potential abuser, not the people who are interfering with the investigation, like something
yeah,
that can
yeah,
be,
somebody who's going to be a perpetrator.
yeah,
Mm.
right.
Well, that you need a psychology person to tell you, but I'll tell you. I often feel, see, now POCSO Act also, it underwent amendments. We saw higher punishment, including a death punishment being prescribed if the child is very young, and in rape also we saw. Again, the debate comes to this, Nirbhaya amendments were very good, very sound, but how come the crimes continue to happen? Why there is no, there's no reduction in sexual offenses against women? So there's a mischief rule that law has, that what is the cause? I feel the cause that when a perpetrator is committing a crime, he's not conscious of how this crime is defined in the statute book. He doesn't care whether it is defined under POCSO, under IPC, or any other act. He doesn't care what is the sentence that is prescribed there. all that he cares about when he's committing a crime is that he can get away with it. The feeling of not being made to book for it, not being accountable for it, the feeling that he can, he will not be caught. That is the feeling that most perpetrators will commit offenses for. So if you can somewhere attack that mentality, that not only will the law catch up with you, not only will will you have to pay be accountable for your offenses, but it will lead you will be sexual offenders, like I mentioned, you go in that directory, so for life you will not get an employment. So these are aspects that I feel, though I'm not really best suited for that answer, but taking it from what a culprit would be thinking at the time of committing an offense, that's the best I could come up with.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I would also like to thank all the members who put forward their questions, really relevant and insightful. Ma'am, thank you once again for being here with us today, taking time out. It was such an honor having you. And I hope that we as a team can take this mission forward that we've signed up for. And I hope that, one day I'll get an opportunity to send you a report of the lives that we've touched and everything that we as a team have achieved. And we'll get you to, appreciate us that day. And again, once again, thank you so much for being here today. Absolute honor, ma'am.
Well, it's an absolute privilege for me. I again apologize for the mix-up. Didn't keep a track of this program, but it was very nice interacting with such motivated, energetic group of youngsters. It's wonderful how you have taken up this cause and getting yourself more uh, skilled to deal with the job that you have, the mission that you have taken. And let me tell you, life is not about how much money one makes. Life is about how much difference can you make in people's lives. And you guys are actually becoming the vehicles of change, making a difference in the lives of people. Let me give you one more thing, that there are legal aid committees now across the length and breadth of the country. So if you anytime find yourself in any problem or any other legal assistance, the mandate of these legal aid committees is to assist. And while for other groups who are not economically disadvantaged groups, they have to pay for assistance, economically disadvantaged groups, women and children, and disabled persons, as a class, irrespective of their economic standing, they are entitled to free legal aid at the expense of the state. There are helplines also, there are one-stop centers also, but please, if you need legal help, I mean, many of you, I'm sure, are legal students, but please, and volunteer there also. We must strengthen the statutory mechanism. The government's, this is a constitutional mandate. It is headed by the Chief Justice of the country and Chief Justice of every state in every state. There are district judges. There's a very interesting mechanism that is in place. I am really proud to be a legal aid volunteer lawyer since the beginning of my professions since almost 2.5 decades now. So if you want to do a good job, have a rapport with the statutory mechanism also, so that you can strengthen them and they can strengthen you. And congratulations. Godspeed to all of you. Thank you. Great job.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.